Dr. Paul Tayyar. Thank you. The genesis of this talk probably had two prime motivators. One was having spent the last 10 years of my life as an English instructor. The bulk of my time is really spent trying to emphasize to students how much language really matters, how it really carries a very, very intensive set of real power when employed correctly. It's incredibly important, I think, especially in a society like ours that's becoming more and more dominated by technology, where a lot of times language really seems to be relegated to kind of second-tier status. I think it's also especially important because when I'm trying to impress upon students the importance of becoming good and thoughtful readers, one of the things that's really necessary is that they have to open up their minds enough to hear the writer's point of view, especially when it really differs or departs from their own. The second key motivator for this talk actually was inspired by the fact that, during the entirety of last year, I was teaching during a presidential election, where the students on a daily basis are hearing speeches delivered nonstop. And I was very much struck by how often it seems to me that we've become trained to think that if we hear a powerful speech, it's almost considered to be a kind of manipulation. That we almost see it as being somebody who's deeply polished and is kind of trying to pull one over on us. And that's certainly the case at times. But at other times, the power of public speaking when it's authentic and when it's sensitive and when it's thoughtful can be enormous. So, given the theme of today's conference that Fran has organized, especially centered around forms and uses of effective and collective nonviolence, I thought I would do a kind of informal lecture showing you especially two key clips. On the night, in the 24 hours immediately after Martin Luther King was shot, tens of American cities really erupted in terrible, terrible violence. There was widespread mass riotings. Two of the major cities that escaped that kind of widespread violence, one was Indianapolis. And historians have attributed to that in large part to the fact that against the advice of his team of kind of attendants, Robert Kennedy delivered an impromptu speech to a mass of individuals who had gathered there that night. And it's really fascinating to watch how an effective speaker speaking from the heart, with employing a couple of key public speaking techniques, really was able to take a group that starts out as he speaks, that's terribly hurt and angry, and he's able to take them to a completely different place. The second city that escaped a lot of this wide-scale violence was Boston. And in large part that was attributed to the fact that James Brown, who had been scheduled to give a concert the night after King had been shot, decided to go on with the concert. And I have clips of both the Kennedy speech and the James Brown thing where you can see, in the James Brown instance, a riot is beginning to start as he's finishing his show. As the people in the crowd and the cops start to engage in violence, he's able to talk both sides out of it. And it's really fascinating to watch. So I thought what I would like to do is show these clips for a few minutes, and then we can talk about what really is going on. What are we responding to? What is it that us as listeners and as viewers are so being affected by? That they were able to use just their words as really, really vital and important tools to stave off really terrible violence. I guess I'd have to say too, it's great to live in the age of YouTube when you can pull these kinds of things up so much more easily than it used to be the case. So without further ado, I'll show you the Kennedy speech, and then we can kind of talk about it and discuss it a little bit, okay?
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. A favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And want to dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.